So for our collapse in box tutorial, we are going to need 10 squares of fabric. Now I've cut 6-inch squares. You could use 5-inch squares from a charm pack if you're into charm packs and patchwork, or you can cut the squares to any size that you want. But you basically need 8 squares to go around the outside of the box and 2 squares which are going to represent the base. So I'm going to alternate the blue and the light blue, and then I'm going to have this as my base. And then you also need a zip which is longer than the diagonal of your base. So I've got a zip here which is, let me just quickly measure it. It is it's a 10-inch zip, and I'm dealing with a 6-inch square. And then you're also going to need something stiff that will go into the sides of your box. So if you have lots of fabric stiffeners to hand, you could use something like a Pellon 70, or you could use the plastic grid that you can put in a handbag base. But I'm actually going to make mine and put cardboard in it, because I've got loads of cardboard from deliveries that have been coming to the house, and I'm going to use this as a scrap basket on my sewing table. You could similarly use it to store your socks and your pants in and be a drawer organiser. They've got loads of different uses, and they're really, really simple to make. So 10 squares of the size of your choice, but I'm working with 6-inch squares, and I've got a 10-inch zip, but the zip needs to make sure that it is longer than the diagonal of your base. So, okay, let's get started. So the very first thing that we need to do is take our 2 base pieces, and I've got those neatly stacked on top of each other, and I'm just going to cut them in half along the diagonal. So I'm going to use a rotary cutter and a ruler, but you could use a ruler and a pencil and some scissors, that would be absolutely fine. And then I've got my 4 triangles now. So we need to insert the zip. So I'm going to take 2 of these triangles. If you're worried about the pattern matching, then you're going to need to take 1 pair. If you're not worried about the pattern matching, then you could just take the 2 that are on the top. I'm going to take 1 pair. I'm going to get my zip, and I'm going to position the first one on the diagonal on top of the zip. Now be really careful, because the diagonal side can sometimes stretch. Can you see if I just pull that? That's just going to stretch out of shape. So we're pinning it onto the zip, doing our very best not to distort that at all. So I'm going to pop a pin in that end, and a pin in the middle, and a pin down in that end. And notice I've got my zip the right way up, and I've got my top fabric the wrong side up, so right side down. And then I'm just going to slide that one behind. And just because it's a little bit trickier because it's on the diagonal, I'm just going to line my fabrics up down here on the point, which should mean that they're exactly lined up here. And then I'm just going to transfer those pins through so that they're grabbing both bits of fabric. You could do it all in one step if you wanted to, but sometimes it's just easier to do it in 2, and then you're going to distort the fabric a little bit less, or you've got less chance of distorting it. Okay. So with that all pinned, I'll now take you over to the sewing machine and we'll do the next step. Okay, so I'm about to insert my zip. I'm loaded in the machine. I've got my zipper foot on, and I've got my needle coming down on the left hand side of my zipper foot, and that is because the zip is on the left hand side of my zipper foot, so everything's lined up. I've set my machine to a 2.5, 3-ish stitch length, somewhere around there, and I've got the edge of my presser foot over here, this outside edge of my presser foot, running down the outside edge of my fabric. So you just need to find something to reference on your zipper foot and your sewing machine to know that you're going to be coming down in a nice parallel line to your zip. So I'm just going to start with a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to reverse, and then I'm going to come down all the way down. Just going to stop to take that pin out. And I'm just going to stop to take that pin out as well. And as I got to the bottom there, I did a little reverse as well. So that's one side of the zip inserted, and I shall now do exactly the same on the other side of the zip. Having stitched in the first side of your zip, and you need to take great care because you've cut your fabric on the bias at this stage, so the zip could, the fabric could stretch along the zip. But having sewn in that first side, we're then going to flip over and pin the second pair of half triangles to the other side of the zip. Again, make sure that you don't overstretch the fabric as you're pinning, and you want to make sure that the points are level with the points from the first side. So take a little bit of care and attention over this, and I've just pinned this in place, and I'm now going to take that over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch that side in place as well. I've now given those fabrics a really good press away from the zip. So by gently ironing over the top, depending on how hot your iron is, you can get away with this over the top of the zip. So that's nicely pressed away, and that's the bottom all prepared for us. So that can go to one side. So my next step is to prepare the side panels to my basket. So I can either decide that all of my panels are going to be dark blue on the outside and light blue on the inside, or I could alternate my panels. So I'm just going to have a little bit of a fun and play around with that. I think I'm going to alternate them, and I'm just going to be stitching them together, right sides together down here, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. To make it easier when I come to attach my side pieces to my bottom piece, I'm actually going to not sew the bottom 1/4 inch of all of my seams. So I've got two pieces here that I'm going to be stitching together. I'm going to alternate my panels, and I'm just going to mark with a fabric pen the last 1/4 inch, and I'm not going to sew that 1/4 inch because I'm going to be joining that to the base of my basket. So on each pair I'm going to join them together, 1/4 inch seam allowance, missing out the bottom 1/4 inch, and I'm going to sew them in an alternating pattern, and I'll do 4 for the outside in a strip and then 4 for the inside. So I'll go to the sewing machine and do that, and then I'll show you what I've got. Having sewn together my 2 strips of fabric, my boxes, I'm now going to just press the seams, and I'm actually going to press them to the dark side on this, but if the fabric was very similar I would press the seams open. So I'm going to press all the seams so they sit behind the darker of the fabrics, and then I'm also on the end opposite to where my seams are open, so at the top I'm just going to press over a 1/4 inch, and that's going to help me when it comes to finishing the project off. So first things first, I'm pressing my seams, and these are all going to go behind the dark fabrics like so. And then having done that, I'm just going to turn over a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press that down all the way along the top of my project. And as I say, that's going to help me at the final stages get a really nice, neat finish. As you can see, I'm doing this by eye, but I would recommend that you measure it if you're at all unsure. It's really interesting, I think, sometimes how some fabrics really crease nicely and others less so. So that's one set, and I will do exactly the same with the second set. So having now pressed everything into place, I'm just going to finish off this last seam. So I'm going to join the 2 open ends together so that then I will have created a box like so, and I'll do exactly the same with the other one. So I'm going to stitch from that top edge where I've ironed in the creases all the way down, leaving a 1/4 inch open at the bottom. Okay, so this is the slightly tricky bit, if you like. We're now going to attach the sides of our box to our base of our box. So I'm just taking one side at this stage, and ideally the zip will be on the inside of your pouch. So this is an inside fabric with an inside, and I'm going to start here and I'm going to line one square up just like that with the edge of my base. So I'm keeping my zip nice and flat, and I'm lining that edge of my blue with the edge of my base. And I'm just going to pin that in place. And my little 1/4 inch seam allowances, they're just going to get tucked back out of the way. So we're not going to stitch all the way across my 1/4 inch, because then it's going to get in the way for this corner. So my little blue 1/4 inch, my pale blue 1/4 inch, is going to get folded back there. If I just put a pin in that, and then I'll be able to show you. And then similarly at the other end. So if I just bring that up so it's a little bit closer. So my seam allowances, my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I've just folded them back to show a little bit of the base fabric in that corner and expose a bit of the zip in this corner. And I'm now going to sew those two edges of fabric together using a 1/4 inch, just like before. So that's all stitched in. I only stitched, remember, through one of my base layers. So I didn't stitch through both. And I'm now going to take my pins out. I'm going to flip my fabric. And I'm now going to sew the dark blue layer to the next side of my project. So all the time I'm trying to make sure that I'm only sewing through one layer of the base, and I've got my sides lined up. So I'll just pin this one and show you how I'm doing this one. So I'm going to be folding back that little blue corner, just like that. And I'm going to stitch along that top edge to the other corner over there. Okay, so I've repeated that process on all 4 sides of my project, and you can begin to see it taking shape. Now at the moment my zip is very much on the outside, so I'm just going to now take hold of that and push that through to the inside of my project. It will slide through because there is a small gap there. So that zip is now sitting down in the corner of my project, and I'm now going to repeat exactly the same process but for the other side. So I'm just going to move the zip out of the way a little bit, and I want to make sure that this time I've got alternating colours. So if I've got light blue on that side, I want to have dark blue on this side. So I'm just going to start with the dark blue one, and I'm going to line that up and stitch that in place. And I'll go round and do exactly the same technique that we did on the first set. So I've now got both boxes attached. That's one box there, and that's another box there, and I've got this funny flappy thing going on here right now. So the first thing to do is to trim off this extra zip that I don't need. So I'm going to take that off, remembering to use old scissors, like that. And then do exactly the same on the other side. Take that off there. Take that off there. And then I'm going to bring my box through. So I want the zip head to be on the inside. So my zip head is down there. So that's my inside. So that means this side is coming through up to this side, like so. So I can now push out the bottom corners on my box. Like so. And now I'm going to line up my seams and just check that everything is sitting together quite nicely. So I'm just going to line that one up. And then line this one up. Come along and line up the next one. And then come along and line up the last one. Like so. So there we can see my box. It's a bit floppy at the moment because it hasn't got anything in it. So if you have some Pellon 70, you could pop that down inside and iron that in place if it was fusible. You could put fusible fleece down in there and iron that in place. But I'm going to use some cardboard. So what I'm just going to do first is I'm going to stitch in my ditch down here. So where I've got my seams lined up, I'm going to line those up all the way down to the bottom to make sure that those seams are on top of each other. And then I'm just going to get my machine in, and it doesn't have to be the whole of the seam, but I'm just going to try and stitch in the ditch down a large chunk of that seam all the way up to the top edge, and I'm going to do that on each corner. And that's only because I'm going to be using cardboard as my insert. If you were using something fusible like the Pellon, like fusible fleece, anything like that, you don't need to worry about this step because those things are going to fuse into place. But because I'm just going to slip cardboard down inside mine, I'm just matching up my seams and basically creating channels for the cardboard to go down into. Similarly, if you were using plastic grid, you'd want to do exactly the same. Get those seams lined up so that when you slip your plastic grid down in there, it's going to sit nicely in its channels. So I've pinned that all from the outside. Just check how your pins are doing on the inside and whether you're happy with where they are. Are they on the seam line? And they are. So I'm just going to go back over to the machine, and as I say, I'm going to stitch from about here, wherever I can comfortably get to with the machine, all the way down to the top of my project, so that I'm creating 4 channels for my cardboard to go into. So I'll just go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to stitch in the ditch, so exactly on top of my seam line, and then I shall come back. Okay, so I have now stitched down and created my channels. You won't be able to see the stitching. I've managed to do that quite successfully, but you can see that I've now created channels in the side of my box. And what I'm going to do is I've cut some cardboard to size, is I'm just going to slip the cardboard panels down inside. Now, whether you're using cardboard or fusible interfacing or whatever you're using, there's normally a little bit of jiggling around to be done. So I'm just going to slide that in there. I've ended up trimming these to a 5 1/4 of an inch, even though I started off with a 6-inch square, just because to get that ease of slide. Sometimes, if it isn't sliding in very easily, just by trimming the point off the corners, you can slide something in a little bit easier. So that one's gone down in there. That one's gone down in there. That one's gone down in there. I think that one just needs a tinsy bit more trimmed off it, so I'm just going to do that with scissors. Can't have cut it, I haven't cut it particularly straight, so I'm just going to trim a little bit off. Do that by eye. There we go, and pop it back down in. There we go, that's better. And then I'm going to sew those shut hand stitching, just hand stitching, whip stitching across the top. You could have the cardboard a little bit lower and then top stitch across the top with your sewing machine. That's completely possible as well, but I'm just going to do it by hand. I'll sit in front of the telly this evening and do that. So with a good press, there's your box, and when you don't want it, you just unzip it and it folds nice and flat for storage. So one pop-up storage box, collapsible storage box, whatever you want to call it. I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial, and look forward to showing you something else again soon. As always, if you do make one of our projects, I'd love to see it. So do tag us if you post it on social media by saying @madeandmaking, or feel free to drop us an email and send us a photo. It's a lovely way to brighten up the inbox on a Monday morning. Thank you very much for watching.